The crimson star cast a blood-red glow across the crystalline spires of the royal palace of Aravian. Inside the tallest tower, Princess Lyra Aravane stood before the Council of Elders, her silver-flecked skin shimmering in the dim light of the ancient chamber. At 23 cycles, she was the youngest heir to the throne in 5 generations, and now possibly the last of her line. "The evidence is irrefutable, Your Highness." Elder Malin's voice echoed through the chamber. His aged face remained impassive, though Lyra could sense the disappointment radiating from him. "The classified documents regarding the Krell outpost's vulnerability were accessed through your personal quantum terminal." Lyra's heart hammered against her chest. "I have already acknowledged this grave error, Elder. But I never intended." "Intentions matter little when honor is at stake," Elder Safine interrupted, her jeweled headdress tinkling softly as she leaned forward. "The outpost fell. 300 Aravian soldiers perished. The royal bloodline has been tainted." The words struck Lyra like physical blows. She had been careless, leaving her terminal unlocked while attending to a diplomatic guest. Never had she imagined that such a momentary lapse would lead to catastrophe. "The council has deliberated," Elder Malin continued, his voice betraying no emotion. "In accordance with the Code of Eternal Honor, you are hereby sentenced to undergo the Cindermark ritual in 7 days' time." A collective gasp rippled through the few courtiers present. The Cindermark ritual had not been performed in over a century. It was the ultimate sacrifice, ceremonial suicide to restore honor to the royal bloodline. Lyra felt her legs weaken beneath her, but royal training kept her standing tall. "I accept the council's judgment," she responded, her voice steadier than she felt. "I shall restore honor to my family and our people." As the council members filed out, Lyra remained motionless, trying to process the reality of her sentence. Only when the massive doors closed did she allow a single tear to trace down her cheek. "Your Highness," the deep voice startled her. Captain Marcus Hale stepped from the shadows, where he had been stationed throughout the proceedings. The human's presence was still unusual in the royal court, even after 2 years as head of the princess's protection detail, a position created at the insistence of the Galactic Alliance. "Captain Hale." Lyra acknowledged him with a slight nod, quickly composing herself. "I imagine this must seem primitive to you." Marcus's face remained professionally neutral, but Lyra noticed the tension in his jaw. "It's not my place to judge Aravian customs, Your Highness." "And yet you do," she replied, a hint of defiance in her tone. "I serve at your pleasure and for your protection," he said carefully. "That remains my duty until otherwise instructed." Lyra turned away, walking toward the towering crystal windows. The capital city of Aravalis stretched below, its buildings catching and refracting the crimson light of their sun. "There will be nothing to protect in 7 days, Captain," she said softly. "You will be reassigned. Perhaps you can return to Earth, away from our primitive customs." Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Your Highness, if I may speak freely." She gave a barely perceptible nod. "The evidence against you was gathered with remarkable speed, almost as if someone was waiting for you to make a mistake." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "That borders on sedition, Captain." "I prefer to call it tactical assessment," he replied. "In my experience, when a situation seems this clear-cut, it rarely is." "Are you suggesting treachery within the council?" "I'm suggesting that your death might be very convenient for certain factions." Lyra turned to face him fully now, studying the human's features. Captain Hale was tall, even by human standards, towering over most Aravians. His dark skin contrasted with the pale blue of his eyes, an unusual combination that had initially fascinated the court. He wore the standard black uniform of the Galactic Alliance security forces, modified with Aravian emblems, out of respect for their customs. "Even if what you suggest were true, the sentence has been passed," Lyra said, I cannot refuse the Cindermark without bringing eternal shame to my lineage and destabilizing the entire system of governance. There may be another way, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper now. If you would trust me. Before Lyra could respond, the chamber doors swung open. Ambassador Ezel entered with a retinue of attendants, tall and imposing even for an Aravian, with elaborate markings denoting his high birth. Ezel had been a constant presence at court since Lyra's father's death 2 years ago. Your Highness, he said, bowing with perfect precision. I came as soon as I heard. A tragic day for Aravian. Ambassador, Lyra acknowledged, her royal mask slipping back into place. Captain Hale. Ezel nodded toward Marcus with considerably less deference. Your presence is no longer required. The princess will be attended by traditional Cindermark guardians from this point forward. Marcus stiffened but maintained protocol. With respect, Ambassador, my orders come directly from the Galactic Alliance and can only be countermanded by royal decree. Ezel finished smoothly, producing a document bearing the royal seal. Signed by the council in the interim. The princess's final days must be observed according to sacred tradition, without outsider presence. Lyra felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. The speed with which Ezel had produced the document lent credence to Marcus's suspicions. Is this your wish, Your Highness? Marcus asked, his eyes locked on hers. For a fleeting moment, Lyra considered defying the document, keeping Marcus at her side. But centuries of training and royal duty prevailed. It is appropriate, she said formally. Captain Hale, you are relieved of your duties to the crown. Aravian thanks you for your service. Marcus's face revealed nothing, but Lyra caught the almost imperceptible nod he gave her, a signal they had established long ago, a request for a private audience. As you wish, Your Highness, he said, bowing deeply. It has been an honor to serve. As he straightened, he added, I will attend to the final protocols before my departure, including the inspection of your private chambers for security matters that may concern the Alliance. Ezel frowned. That won't be standard procedure, Ambassador. Marcus cut in smoothly. Alliance regulations are quite clear. Unless Aravian wishes to violate our treaty terms. The ambassador's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. Very well. You have until sundown. Marcus bowed once more to Lyra, then departed without another word. Your Highness, the ritual preparations must begin immediately, Ezel said, gesturing toward the attendants who had brought ceremonial robes of shimmering white fabric. I request an hour of solitude first, Lyra said, summoning every ounce of royal authority she possessed. To contemplate my duty to Aravian. Ezel hesitated, then bowed. Of course, Your Highness. We shall await you in the preparation chamber. When they had all departed, Lyra let out a shaky breath and moved swiftly to her private chambers. As expected, Marcus was waiting, having used the secret passage that had been shown to him when he first took command of her security. We have minutes at most, she said without preamble. Then I'll be direct, Marcus replied. Your life is in danger. Lyra almost laughed. That much is evident, Captain. In exactly 7 days, I will take Astra's Edge and— Not from the ritual, Marcus interrupted urgently. I believe someone deliberately engineered your downfall. The same someone who might not be content to wait 7 days for a public ceremony where anything could go wrong. Lyra's expression darkened. Ezel. He moved too quickly with that dismissal order, and my sources report unusual communications between his compound and off-world mercenary groups. You've been spying on an Aravian ambassador? Lyra asked, though without real reproach. I've been doing my job, Marcus replied simply. Protecting you. Lyra began pacing the opulent chamber, her mind racing. Even if you're right, I cannot flee. To reject the Cindermark would destroy centuries of tradition that hold our society together. I'm not asking you to reject it publicly, Marcus said, just to postpone it until we can discover the truth. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Let me take you somewhere safe. Just for a few days. If I'm wrong, you can return and fulfill your duty. No one need ever know. Lyra stopped pacing, studying him intently. And if you're right? Then you'll have saved more than your honor. You'll have saved your people from a manipulator who would sacrifice their princess for personal gain. Lyra turned away, conflict evident in every line of her body. Her gaze fell upon the portrait of her father on the wall, stern, honorable, unbending in his devotion to tradition. My father would call this cowardice, she whispered. Your father would want you alive to defend your people, Marcus countered softly. Sometimes the most honorable path isn't the most obvious one. A soft chime indicated movement in the main corridor. Time was running out. How would we even leave the palace? Lyra asked. I am watched constantly. Marcus smiled for the first time. I didn't spend 2 years as your protector without learning every entrance, exit, and blind spot in this palace. He gestured to the small bag he had brought. Change into these. Plain clothes. No royal insignia. Lyra took the bag, still hesitating. If we're caught. We won't be, Marcus said with quiet confidence. But we need to move now. Your Highness. Lyra took a deep breath. If we do this, if I go with you, you must swear to me that if we find no evidence of treachery, you will return me for the cinder mark. Honor must be satisfied. Marcus's expression grew serious. I swear it. Then let us proceed, Captain, Lyra said, her decision made, and may the stars forgive me if I'm wrong. As the crimson sun set over Aravalis, the palace erupted into chaos. The princess had vanished from her chambers, and with her, the human captain who had been dismissed from her service. By the time Ambassador Azel organized a search party, their transport was already breaching the atmosphere, bound for the Crystal Mountains in the Northern Hemisphere, a place of ancient temples and forgotten retreats where even royal trackers might lose their trail. The abandoned villa clung to the side of the Crystal Mountain, like a barnacle to a ship's hull. Once a retreat for Aravian nobility, it had been deserted for decades after a series of avalanches made the area too dangerous for casual visitors. Now, its isolation made it perfect for their purposes. 3 days had passed since their escape from the palace. Lyra stood on the crumbling balcony, watching ice crystals form intricate patterns on the railing. The bitter cold of the mountain barely registered through her thermal cloak, a gift from Marcus, who had prepared for their flight with surprising thoroughness. Your Highness, the voice came from behind her. Not Marcus this time, but Dr. Solon, who had joined them the previous day. Lyra turned to face the Aravian physician. Unlike most of their people, Solon wore no ornate clothing or decorative skin markings. His simple attire reflected his practical nature, which had always made him something of an outsider in the royal court, and perhaps why he had been willing to risk everything to help them. I've told you, Doctor. There's no need for formalities here, Lyra said with a small smile. Old habits, Solon replied, returning the smile briefly before his expression grew serious. I've completed my analysis of the palace security logs Marcus obtained. Lyra's heart quickened. And the transmission that leaked the outpost's defense codes did originate from your terminal, Solon confirmed. But the biometric authentication was unusual. How so? The system registered your unique brainwave pattern, but the specific frequencies show subtle differences from your baseline. Almost as if someone created a synthetic overlay of my neural signature, Lyra finished, her eyes widening. Solon nodded grimly. Precisely. Extremely sophisticated technology, far beyond standard Aravian capabilities. But not beyond galactic black market tech, Marcus added, stepping onto the balcony. His breath fogged in the frigid air as he handed them both steaming cups of herbal tea. I've seen similar identity spoofing used in the Outer Rim territories. Lyra wrapped her hands around the warm cup, her mind racing. This proves my terminal was compromised, but not by whom. I have a theory about that too, Marcus said, leaning against the railing. Ambassador Ezel has been pushing for stronger ties with the Syndicate worlds, against Alliance recommendations. The Syndicate would certainly have access to such technology, Solon mused. And they would benefit greatly from destabilizing Aravian leadership, Lyra added, the pieces falling into place. Especially with Ezel whispering in the ear of whoever took my place. She set down her cup, a new determination hardening her features. We need proof. Concrete evidence that would convince the Council. I'm working on it, Marcus assured her. I have contacts in the Alliance who are tracking the financial transactions between Isel's office and known Syndicate fronts. Lyra nodded, then suddenly winced, pressing a hand to her temple. Your Highness, Solon moved forward instantly, medical concern overriding protocol. I'm fine, she insisted, though the pain was evident in her eyes. Just another headache. That's the third one today, Marcus noted, his brow furrowing with concern. The withdrawal symptoms are progressing as expected, Solon explained, guiding Lyra to sit on a nearby bench. The ceremonial preparations for the Cindermark include specialized compounds to make the subject more receptive to the ritual's psychological components. You mean they were drugging her? Marcus asked, anger flashing in his eyes. Not maliciously, Solon clarified. It's part of the traditional preparation. The compounds help the condemned accept their fate, find peace in sacrifice. They make you compliant, Marcus said flatly. Lyra's eyes met his. It's our way, Marcus. Has been for millennia. Well, it's a way that's about to get you killed, he replied, his formal restraint slipping. It was the first time he had used her name without her title, a breach of protocol that neither of them acknowledged. Dr. Solon, Lyra said, still holding Marcus's gaze. Would you give us a moment, please? The physician bowed slightly and retreated inside, leaving them alone on the balcony. You're angry, Lyra observed once they were alone. I'm concerned, Marcus corrected, though his jaw remained tight. These compounds could be affecting your judgment. My judgment was clear enough to leave with you, she reminded him. And yet you still speak of returning for the ritual if we don't find proof of Isel's treachery. Lyra stood, moving to the railing again. Because honor demands it. Honor? Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and intense. Is honor worth your life? Worth the future of your people under Isel's influence? You don't understand, Lyra said, frustration coloring her words. Without our traditions, without our honor code, what are we? Just another species scrabbling for power in the galaxy. Your people, Marcus said simply. Imperfect, complex, valuable people. Not symbols, not vessels for tradition, but individuals with the right to live. Lyra turned to him, really looking at him now. Is that how humans see us? As backwards fanatics clinging to outdated rituals? That's not what I said. But it's what you think, she pressed. That we're primitive, with our honor codes and sacrifices. Marcus ran a hand through his short, dark hair, visibly gathering his patience. What I think is that different cultures have different values, and that's fine, until those values demand the death of someone who deserves to live. And you've decided I deserve to live? Lyra asked, a strange vulnerability entering her voice. Yes, Marcus answered without hesitation. Not because you're a princess, not because of your strategic value to the Alliance, but because you're a person of conscience who was framed for a crime she didn't commit. The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. For her entire life, Lyra's value had been tied to her royal blood, to her future role, to what she represented. Never had anyone valued her simply for being herself. A crystal flower, improbably blooming in the snow of the balcony's edge, caught her attention, delicate and luminous. It had somehow found the strength to push through the ice. My mother loved these, she said softly, touching the flower's petals gently. Stars' tears, they're called. They only bloom in the harshest conditions. Marcus moved beside her, studying the flower. Beautiful, he agreed, and resilient. She used to say that true strength isn't about never breaking, Lyra continued, lost in memory. It's about what you become when you're broken, how you reshape yourself. Wise words. Lyra looked up at him, really seeing the human for perhaps the first time. Not as her protector, not as an alliance representative, but as a man who had risked everything to save her. Why did you do it, Marcus? She asked quietly. Why risk your career, your life, for me? He held her gaze steadily. Because it was right. There must be more to it than that. Marcus looked away, out at the vast expanse of crystal mountains stretching to the horizon. When I was assigned to Aravian, I studied your history, your customs. I came to respect your people's devotion to principle, to honor. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I also saw how that same devotion could be weaponized, used to control. I watched how isolated you were, even surrounded by courtiers. How every action, every word was judged against an impossible standard. And you pitied me, Lyra concluded, a hint of bitterness in her tone. No, Marcus said firmly, turning back to her. I admired you, your grace under that pressure, your genuine care for your people despite the constraints placed upon you. He took a breath, as if crossing some internal threshold. And over time, that admiration became something more. The admission hung between them, as delicate and unexpected as the crystal flower blooming in the snow. Before Lyra could respond, the door to the balcony burst open. Solon rushed out, his calm demeanor shattered. Captain, Your Highness, emergency broadcast from the capital. They hurried inside to the small communications unit. On the screen, chaos unfolded in the streets of Aravalis. Protesters clashed with royal guards, while an announcer's voice narrated over the footage. Miss Nae. Following the shocking revelation of Princess Lyra's flight from justice, Ambassador Izel has called for emergency powers to stabilize the government until a suitable heir can be identified from the extended royal bloodline. The camera cut to Izel himself, addressing a crowd from the palace steps. It pains me deeply to inform you that our princess, overcome with shame, has abandoned her sacred duty, he proclaimed, his expression a perfect mask of sorrowful dignity. This unprecedented dishonor leaves us no choice but to invoke the ancient right of succession through trial. I have submitted myself as the first candidate. He's making his move, Marcus said grimly. Faster than I expected. The Cindermark ceremony will proceed as scheduled. Izel continued on screen. But with a symbolic stand-in for the disgraced princess, the ritual must be completed to restore harmony to our world. The broadcast cut to images of workers preparing the Cindermark Temple, a massive structure of obsidian and crystal at the heart of the capital. This doesn't make sense, Lyra said, shaking her head. The Cindermark is a personal atonement. A symbolic stand-in has no meaning in our traditions. Unless the ceremony itself is merely a pretext, Solon suggested, his scientific mind racing ahead. A gathering of all the noble houses, the Council of Elders, the military leadership. A perfect target, Marcus finished, his expression darkening. Your Highness, I believe Izel is planning something far worse than usurping your throne. Lyra's eyes widened as the implications became clear. He's going to eliminate anyone who might oppose him. All at once. A heavy silence fell over the room as the magnitude of the threat sank in. We need to get back to the capital, Lyra said finally, her voice gaining strength with each word. Immediately. That's exactly what he wants, Marcus cautioned. He's using the ceremony as bait, knowing you'd return to stop it. Then we'll be smarter than he expects, Lyra replied, a new determination hardening her features. Dr. Solon, How quickly can you synthesize an antidote to the ceremonial compounds in my system? A few hours, perhaps, Solon replied. But complete neutralization would take days. We don't have days, Lyra said grimly. Do what you can, Captain Hale. We need a plan to infiltrate the Cindermark Temple, undetected. Marcus studied her for a moment, seeing the transformation taking place before his eyes. The vulnerable woman from the balcony was gone, replaced by a leader, ready to fight for her people. As you command, Your Highness, he said with a nod of respect. As they began preparations, a peculiar light caught Lyra's eye through the window. High above, one of Aravian's smaller moons glowed with unusual intensity, as if marking the path they must take. The ancient tunnels beneath the Cindermark Temple were damp and narrow, forcing Marcus to crouch as they made their way through the darkness. Ahead of him, Lyra moved with surprising confidence, her knowledge of the secret passages proving invaluable. These tunnels were created during the Third Dynasty, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of machinery above. For the royal family to observe the rituals privately. Marcus checked the small device strapped to his wrist, its screen casting a faint blue glow. We're directly beneath the preparation chambers now. Security presence is minimal. They're focused on the main entrances. As expected, Lyra nodded. Izel would never imagine anyone approaching through these sacred passages. The penalty for trespassing here is death. Adding it to the list, Marcus muttered dryly. Despite the gravity of their situation, Lyra felt a smile tug at her lips. The human's ability to find humor in the darkest moments was something she had come to appreciate during their days in hiding. They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Lyra hesitated, her silver-flecked brow furrowing. I'm not certain which path leads to the inner sanctum. The historical texts were imprecise. Solon, who had insisted on accompanying them despite the danger, stepped forward with a small device. Allow me, he said, scanning the air currents. This way. The air is fresher, suggesting a connection to the upper chambers. As they proceeded down the chosen tunnel, Marcus's communicator vibrated silently. He checked it and frowned. My Alliance contact came through, he whispered. They've confirmed unusual energy signatures within the temple structure, consistent with high-yield explosive devices. Lyra's steps faltered momentarily. How many? At least 7, strategically placed to bring down the entire central dome when detonated. Where all the noble houses will be gathered, Solon added grimly. And with them. Any opposition to Izel's claim to power. Lyra finished, her resolve strengthening. We need to move faster. The tunnel began to slope upward, and soon they could hear the low chanting that accompanied the preliminary rituals. Lyra felt a familiar pull toward the sounds, the ceremonial compounds still lingering in her system, calling her to embrace her fate. Solon noticed her reaction and quietly pressed a small vial into her hand. The last dose of the neutralizing agent. It won't eliminate the effects entirely, but it should help you resist. Lyra nodded gratefully and consumed the bitter liquid in one swift motion. Almost immediately, her mind felt clearer. The hypnotic pull of the chanting diminished. "Thank you, Doctor," she whispered. They reached a section of wall that looked no different from the rest, but Lyra pressed her palm against a specific stone. It glowed faintly in response to her royal bloodline, and a hidden door slid open silently. Beyond lay a small observation chamber, dusty from centuries of disuse. Through an intricate lattice screen, they could see into the heart of the Cindermark Temple. The vast circular chamber was filled with hundreds of Aravian nobles and officials, arranged in concentric circles according to rank and lineage. At the center stood the sacrificial altar, where Astra's edge, the ceremonial sword, lay waiting upon a bed of crystal flames that burned without heat. There, Marcus pointed discreetly, behind the northern column, security personnel with non-standard equipment, Lyra followed his gaze and saw them. Aravians in temple guard attire, but with subtle differences that only someone intimately familiar with the ceremonial protocols would notice. Not temple guards, she confirmed. Likely mercenaries placed by Isel. I count at least 12, Marcus murmured. Too many to neutralize quietly. Solon, who had been examining the chamber with a scientist's careful eye, suddenly stiffened. The explosives, he whispered urgently. Look at the ceremonial braziers. Lyra and Marcus turned their attention to the 7 large braziers positioned around the altar, traditionally used to burn offering herbs. They now emanated a subtly different light than Lyra remembered from previous ceremonies. He's hidden the devices in plain sight, Marcus realized. Ingenious and sacrilegious in equal measure. We need to warn them, Lyra said, moving toward the chamber entrance. Marcus caught her arm. That's exactly what he wants. You appearing suddenly, seemingly confirming your guilt. We need to be smarter. Then, what do you suggest, Captain? Lyra asked, the formal title slipping out in her tension. Before Marcus could respond, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Ambassador Isel had entered the chamber, dressed in ceremonial robes nearly identical to those the princess would have worn. Behind him walked a hooded figure, face obscured, the symbolic stand-in for Lyra. My people, Isel's voice resonated throughout the temple. Today, we witness a ceremony of grief and renewal. Though our princess has forsaken her duty, the Cindermark must still be completed to restore honor to our world. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some of agreement, others of uncertainty. Lyra could see the Council of Elders, seated in a special section, their expressions troubled despite their formal masks. He's playing on their devotion to tradition, Lyra whispered, while completely perverting its meaning. Look at Elder Malin, Solon pointed out. He seems especially disturbed. Indeed. The eldest of the council members was leaning forward. His ancient eyes narrowed as he studied the proceedings with visible suspicion. He knows something's wrong, Lyra said. Malin has overseen more rituals than anyone alive. He would recognize the deviations. Can we get a message to him? Marcus asked. Lyra thought for a moment, then reached for the royal pendant she still wore beneath her simple clothing. A small crystal. It had been passed down through generations of Aravian royalty. In the old stories, she said, these crystals were said to resonate with each other. The council members each wear one similar to mine. Solon looked skeptical. Your Highness, those are just legends. There's no scientific basis. Sometimes the oldest legends contain forgotten truths, Lyra interrupted, holding the crystal tightly. And right now, legend is all we have. She closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts on the crystal as she had been taught as a child, a practice she had always dismissed as mere tradition. To her surprise, the pendant began to warm in her palm, emitting a faint glow. In the chamber beyond, Elder Malin suddenly straightened, his hand moving to his own pendant. His eyes, keen despite his age, scanned the chamber until they fixed directly on the lattice screen behind which they hid. Impossible, Solon breathed. He senses me, Lyra said with wonder. The connection is real. Below, the ceremony continued, approaching the critical moment. The hooded figure was being led to the altar, while Isel began the ancient invocation. We must act now, Marcus urged. If he completes the ritual before detonating the explosives, it will seem like divine judgment on the entire noble class. Lyra made her decision. She removed the pendant from her neck and pressed it into Solon's hand. Take this. Stay hidden, but keep the connection with Malin active. He may be our only ally in there. What are you going to do? Solon asked, alarm evident in his voice. What I should have done from the beginning, Lyra replied, her voice gaining strength. Face my accusers and speak truth, regardless of the consequences. Before either man could stop her, Lyra slipped through the hidden door that led directly to the temple floor. Marcus cursed under his breath and moved to follow, but Solon held him back. "Wait," the doctor whispered. "Look at the mercenaries where they're moving into position. If you rush in now, you'll trigger exactly what we're trying to prevent." Marcus hesitated, torn between protecting Lyra and recognizing the tactical wisdom in Solon's words. "Then, what do you suggest?" "Focus on the explosives," Solon said. "I believe I can use the pendant to communicate with Malin. Warn him to evacuate the chamber subtly, while Lyra creates a distraction." Marcus nodded grimly. "I'll need a distraction of my own to reach those braziers." "I believe," Solon said, a small smile playing at his lips. "The princess is about to provide one." In the temple chamber, Izel had raised Astra's edge, the ceremonial sword gleaming in the light of the crystal flames. The hooded figure knelt before him, head bowed in submission. "By ancient right and sacred duty," Izel intoned, "we cleanse dishonor with noble sacrifice." "There is no honor in deception," Lyra's voice rang out clearly across the chamber. A collective gasp rose from the assembled nobles as Lyra stepped into the open. Her simple clothing, a stark contrast to the ceremonial opulence surrounding her. Izel froze, the sword still raised, his composure cracking for the first time. "Seize her!" he commanded the guards. But the nobles had risen to their feet, confusion and whispers spreading like wildfire. The hooded figure at the altar had turned toward Lyra, the concealing fabric falling away to reveal a young woman, one of Izel's servants, clearly terrified and coerced into the role. "People of Aravian," Lyra projected her voice, as she had been trained since childhood. "You have been deceived, not by my absence, but by the man who claimed to act in the name of tradition while plotting to destroy it entirely." Elder Malin stood now, his pendant glowing visibly against his ceremonial robes. "Let the princess speak," he commanded, his authority momentarily overriding even Izel's. "The Krell outpost fell because information was stolen from my terminal," Lyra acknowledged, moving steadily forward despite the guards now surrounding her. "But I was not the thief. Ambassador Izel used forbidden technology to breach our security systems, sacrificing Aravian lives to create this very moment." Izel's face contorted with rage. "Lies from a coward who fled her duty. Guards, remove her immediately." The temple guards hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities. In that moment of confusion, Lyra pressed her advantage. "If I feared duty, would I return to face you now?" she challenged, addressing the crowd rather than Izel. "I left only to discover the truth, and the truth is that this ceremony is a sham, designed not to restore honor, but to eliminate every noble house in a single stroke." She pointed to the ceremonial braziers. "Those contain explosives, not sacred herbs. Examine them if you doubt me." Chaos erupted as nobles began to move away from the braziers, some fleeing toward the exits. Izel's mercenaries abandoned pretense, drawing weapons and moving to secure the chamber. "Enough of this farce!" Izel shouted, raising a small control device. "If I cannot rule Aravian, no one will." He never managed to activate the device. A precision shot from the observation chamber knocked it from his hand, followed immediately by Marcus Hale, emerging from hiding, weapon drawn. "Captain Hale," Izel sneered, "always the loyal dog. Your galactic alliance will find nothing but ashes when they investigate your disappearance." "The alliance already knows everything," Marcus replied, steadily advancing. "Your communications with the Syndicate, the technology transfer, the planned coup. It's over, Ambassador." Izel's eyes darted around the chamber, calculating. Most of the nobles had fled, but the Council of Elders remained, protected by loyal temple guards. The mercenaries were engaging with security forces at the entrances, creating a perimeter of chaos. "Perhaps," Izel conceded with a cold smile. "But the princess still stands accused. The cinder mark has been invoked. Honor demands completion." "Honor demands truth," Elder Malin countered, stepping forward with surprising agility for his age. Princess Lyra returned to save her people despite the risk to herself. There is no greater honor. Sentiment from a dying regime, Izel spat. The old ways are finished. Aravian requires new leadership, new alliances. The Syndicate offers power, your precious alliance never would. The Syndicate offers nothing but subjugation, Lyra said, moving to stand beside Marcus. As you would know if you truly valued Aravian history. A tremor suddenly shook the temple, dust raining down from the ancient dome above. You're too late, Izel laughed. The primary charges were always on a separate trigger. Remote detonation, on a timer. In moments, the great Cindermark Temple will be your tomb. Marcus glanced at Lyra, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and they moved in perfect synchronization. Lyra toward the altar, while Marcus engaged Izel directly. "Evacuate the temple," Lyra commanded the remaining nobles. "Elder Malin, lead them through the royal passages." As the evacuation began, Marcus and Izel fought across the temple floor. The ambassador was surprisingly skilled, his ceremonial robes concealing combat enhancements that gave him unnatural speed and strength. "You never understood our ways," Izel taunted, as he landed a punishing blow to Marcus's side. "Humans, always believing they know better than civilizations, millennia older than their own." Marcus recovered quickly, using his alliance combat training to anticipate Izel's enhanced movements. "I understand enough," he grunted, executing a feint that put Izel off balance. "I understand loyalty, duty, sacrifice, things you've twisted to serve yourself." Another tremor, stronger than the first, shook the temple. Massive crystal shards began falling from the dome. Lyra had reached the altar and taken up Astra's edge, the ceremonial sword gleaming in her hands. "Izel of House Varin," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I accuse you of treason against the crown and people of Aravian. By ancient right, I challenge you to stand before Astra's judgment." The formal challenge froze everyone in place. Even in this moment of destruction, the invocation of the oldest rite in Aravian culture commanded attention. Izel turned from Marcus, his eyes fixated on Lyra and the sword. "You would invoke the challenger's rite? Now?" "I would," Lyra confirmed, holding the sword with perfect formal posture. "Unless you fear judgment." Pride and ambition warred on Izel's face. To refuse the challenge would be to admit dishonor before those witnesses who remained. A cultural death sentence regardless of whether he escaped the physical one. "I accept," he said finally, moving toward the altar. "Though it seems Astra's judgment will be brief for us all." As Izel approached, Marcus moved to follow, but Lyra shook her head. "This is between us now, Captain. Please, ensure the others reach safety." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus insisted. "Trust me," Lyra said, her eyes conveying what words could not. "As I trusted you." After a moment's hesitation, Marcus nodded and retreated to help with the evacuation, though he remained within the chamber, unwilling to abandon her completely. Izel reached the altar, standing opposite Lyra with the ceremonial flames between them. According to tradition, they would both place their hands on Astra's edge, allowing the sacred blade to judge their honor through ancient technology that could detect falsehood. "A pointless gesture," Izel said as another tremor shook the temple. "We'll both be dead before judgment is rendered." "Perhaps," Lyra acknowledged, extending the sword across the flames. "But I will die with honor. Will you?" Izel's hand joined hers on the hilt, and immediately the crystal flames intensified, changing from their usual blue to a vivid red. The sword began to glow, scanning both participants on a quantum level, a technology so ancient that modern Aravians had forgotten its scientific principles and regarded it as mystical. "Speak your truth," Lyra commanded, following the ritual words. "I have served Aravian faithfully," Izel began, his voice steady despite the destruction around them. "All I have done, I did for our people's advancement." The sword pulsed, the glow darkening around Ezel's hand. "You served only yourself," Lyra countered. "You betrayed our people for power." The crystal flames surged higher, responding to the conflict of truths. Above them, the temple dome cracked further, a massive fissure spreading across its surface. Through the widening gap, the crimson light of Aravian sun poured in, bathing the altar in blood-red illumination. "You are unworthy of the throne," Ezel hissed, abandoning pretense. "The royal line has grown weak, clinging to outdated alliances, while stronger powers rise in the galaxy." "The strength of Aravian was never in conquest," Lyra replied, her voice gaining power. "It was in honor, in truth, in standing by our word even when costly." The sword's glow intensified to blinding levels, the ancient technology reacting to their opposing values. The crystal flames expanded, engulfing both their hands, yet causing no pain to Lyra, while Ezel winced in apparent agony. "Judgment is rendered," Lyra declared, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to transcend the moment. Ezel's eyes widened in genuine fear as the flames crawled up his arm. "This is impossible," he gasped. "The sword is just a symbol. It has no real power." "You've forgotten the oldest teaching," Lyra said calmly, even as the temple continued to crumble around them. "Symbols have the power we give them, and for thousands of years, our people have given this one the power to reveal truth." With a final desperate effort, Ezel tried to pull away, but the sword held him fast. The flames reached his chest, and he fell to his knees. "Mercy!" he gasped, his ambition finally broken. Lyra leaned forward, her voice for his ears alone. "The mercy you planned for my people, for me." A massive section of the dome collapsed nearby, showering them with crystal shards. Lyra knew they had moments at most before the entire structure failed. "Astra has judged," she announced, releasing the sword. The crystal flames immediately receded, freeing them both. "Ambassador Ezel is found wanting. His life is forfeit to the crown." Rather than strike him down, however, Lyra stepped back. "But I choose mercy, not for your sake, but for what Aravian can become. Your punishment will be to live with your dishonor." Ezel stared at her in disbelief as temple guards moved in to seize him. "Your Highness," Marcus called urgently from the periphery. "We need to leave now." Lyra nodded and turned from the altar, but another violent tremor sent her stumbling. A massive crystal beam broke free from above, plummeting directly toward her. Time seemed to slow. Lyra saw the beam falling, knew she couldn't move quickly enough. In that moment, she felt a strange peace. She had restored her honor, saved her people, uncovered truth. It was enough. But the impact never came. Instead, she felt herself tackled aside with tremendous force, rolling across the temple floor. When she regained her orientation, she found Marcus beneath the fallen beam, its weight partially supported by a broken altarpiece but still crushing his lower body. "Marcus!" she cried, scrambling to his side. Timing could have been better. He managed through gritted teeth, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Don't speak," Lyra commanded, assessing the beam, too heavy to move alone. "Help!" she shouted to the few guards still within the chamber. "The captain is trapped." As they rushed over, Lyra cradled Marcus's head. "Why?" she demanded, tears forming despite her royal composure. "Why would you do that?" Marcus looked up at her, his blue eyes remarkably clear despite the pain. "Same reason as before," he whispered. "Because it was right." Then, with effort, he added, "And because I love you, Lyra, not the princess. You." The simple declaration struck Lyra more powerfully than any ceremonial pronouncement she had ever heard. Before she could respond, the guards reached them, and together they managed to lift the beam enough for Marcus to be pulled free. His legs were badly injured, but Solon, who had returned for them, quickly applied emergency medical treatment. "We must go now, Your Highness," the doctor urged. "The structure won't hold much longer." As they carried Marcus toward the royal passage, Lyra glanced back at the ruined temple. Through the shattered dome, a strange phenomenon had appeared in the sky. A distant star, normally invisible in daylight, shining with unusual brilliance directly above the temple. "The guiding star," whispered one of the older guards in awe. Just as in the ancient texts, Lyra recalled the legend, how in Aravian's darkest hour, when honor seemed lost, the guiding star had appeared to lead their ancestors to a new understanding of their most sacred principles. A final tremor urged them onward, and Lyra turned away from the collapsing temple. The past was falling behind them. The future, uncertain, challenging, but filled with new possibility, lay ahead. The royal gardens were in full bloom, crystal flowers catching the morning light and transforming it into 1,000 rainbow fragments across the newly restored palace grounds. 6 months had passed since the Cindermark Temple's destruction, and Aravian was changing, slowly, deliberately, but irrevocably. Lyra stood at the center of the garden, dressed not in the traditional royal regalia, but in a simpler design of her own creation, one that honored tradition while embracing evolution. Around her, members of the newly formed Planetary Council debated the latest trade proposals from the Galactic Alliance. "The manufacturing concessions are too steep," argued Councillor Varen, one of the younger noble representatives. "We would be sacrificing our industrial sovereignty. But the technology exchange would advance our production methods by decades," countered Councillor Maris, a former merchant elevated to the council under Lyra's new meritocratic reforms. Lyra listened carefully to both sides, noting how the discussion remained respectful despite the passionate disagreement. Such open debate would have been unthinkable under the old system, where tradition and hierarchy dictated all decisions. "Your Highness," Elder Malin interjected, using her title out of habit, though she had officially changed it to High Representative in the new governance structure. "What is your assessment?" All eyes turned to Lyra. Though she had voluntarily ceded much of the monarchy's unilateral power, her voice still carried tremendous weight, earned now through her actions rather than merely her bloodline. "Both perspectives have merit," she said thoughtfully. "Our sovereignty must be protected, but isolation is no longer viable in the modern galaxy." She turned to a figure who had been listening quietly from the side of the gathering. "Captain Hale, the Alliance's position on technology transfer restrictions has evolved in recent months. How might that affect these terms?" Marcus Hale stepped forward, moving with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the Cindermark Temple's collapse. His Alliance uniform now bore additional insignia, reflecting his promotion to diplomatic liaison to Aravian. "The Alliance Council recently amended the technology transfer protocols," he explained. "Signatory worlds now retain patent rights to any adaptations of shared technology. This would allow Aravian to develop its own variants without licensing fees." Murmurs of interest rippled through the council members. "That changes the calculation significantly," Councillor Maris noted with approval. "However," Marcus continued, "the manufacturing quotas remain non-negotiable. The Alliance needs a reliable supply chain for quantum crystal components, which Aravian is uniquely positioned to provide." "A fair exchange, then," Lyra concluded. "We provide what only we can offer, and receive what we most need for advancement." The council members nodded in general agreement, and Lyra adjourned the session until the afternoon. As the councillors dispersed, Marcus remained behind, waiting until they were relatively alone among the crystal blooms. "Diplomatic as always," he commented with a small smile. "I learned from watching you navigate our cultural minefields for 2 years," Lyra replied, returning the smile. "How is your leg today?" "Better. Dr. Solin's regenerative treatments are working wonders." Marcus glanced down at his leg. though he warns I'll never break any sprint records. A small price for survival, Lyra said softly, the memory of that day still vivid. They began walking slowly through the garden, following a path that took them to a small memorial erected near the palace walls. A simple crystal structure, honoring those lost in the Krell outpost attack and the Cindermark temple collapse. The syndicate delegation arrived this morning, Marcus informed her, as they paused before the memorial. They're requesting an audience. Lyra's expression hardened slightly. After their involvement with Isil's plot, they have considerable nerve. They've sent a new representative, one untainted by the previous conspiracy, and they're offering reparations. Interesting, Lyra mused. They must be concerned about Aravian's strengthening ties with the Alliance. Political pragmatism, Marcus agreed. Though I'd advise caution, the Syndicate rarely operates without multiple agendas. Lyra nodded, appreciating his counsel as always. Over the months since the temple's destruction, their relationship had evolved alongside Aravian's governance, professional in public, deeply personal in private. They had both sacrificed much and gained much, walking a careful line between their duties and their hearts. I'll meet them tomorrow, she decided. With the full council present, transparency must be our new standard. As they continued their walk, a group of children ran past, laughing as they played among the crystal formations. One small girl stopped suddenly, staring at Lyra with wide, awestruck eyes. Are you really her? The child asked. The princess who changed the old laws. Lyra knelt down to the girl's level. I am Lyra, and I didn't change the laws alone. Many brave people helped make Aravian better. The girl nodded solemnly. My mother says you showed that honor means telling the truth, not just following rules. Your mother is wise, Lyra smiled. Honor lives in our choices, not just our traditions. The child beamed, then ran off to rejoin her friends. Lyra watched her go, a profound satisfaction warming her heart. You've given them a new understanding of what it means to be Aravian, Marcus observed quietly. We have, Lyra corrected him, taking his hand discreetly. I couldn't have done any of this alone. They reached a secluded alcove in the garden, one of the few places where they could speak without the constant awareness of Lyra's public role. Here, crystal flowers grew in unusual abundance, including the rare star's tears that had caught her attention in the mountain hideaway months ago. The syndicate meeting isn't the only matter requiring your attention, Marcus said, suddenly seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. I've received new orders from Alliance Command. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's temperature. They're reassigning you. They've offered me a promotion, he confirmed. Fleet Commander, overseeing Alliance security in the entire sector. A considerable honor, Lyra said, maintaining her composure with effort. You've earned it many times over. I haven't accepted yet. Lyra looked at him in surprise. Why not? It's everything you've worked toward in your career. Marcus took both her hands in his expression uncommonly vulnerable. Because acceptance would mean leaving Aravian, leaving you. The simple admission hung between them, weighted with all the complications of their positions. Their private relationship had been conducted with utmost discretion, both aware of the political sensitivities involved. A high representative of Aravian and an Alliance officer, from different worlds, different cultures. Marcus, Lyra began carefully, your career is important to me, he finished, but not as important as what we've built here. Not just between us, but for your world, for the Alliance, for the future. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the light, a crystal pendant, similar to the royal one Lyra still wore, but with subtle differences in its formation. On Earth, we have traditions too, he said, holding up the pendant. Different from yours, but meaningful nonetheless. This was my grandmother's, passed down through generations. In my family, it's given as a promise. Lyra's breath caught as she understood the implication. Marcus, the council would never— I'm not asking the council, he interrupted gently. I'm asking you, Lyra, not the High Representative, not the former princess, but the woman who taught me that honor means following your heart, even when duty seems to point elsewhere. He took a deep breath. I've requested a permanent diplomatic posting to Aravian. Alliance Command has tentatively approved, pending your government's acceptance. Lyra stared at him, processing the enormity of what he was proposing. It would cause a political stir unlike anything since the reforms began. Probably, Marcus acknowledged with a small smile. The traditionalists would be outraged. Undoubtedly, we would be setting a precedent that could change interstellar relations throughout the sector. That had occurred to me, Marcus nodded, his smile widening slightly. Despite herself, Lyra felt an answering smile forming. You've considered all the complications and decided to proceed anyway. I learned from the best, he replied, echoing her earlier words. A certain Aravian royal who taught me that sometimes the most honorable path isn't the most obvious one. Lyra reached out, closing his fingers around the pendant. Then perhaps that same Aravian should follow her own wisdom. She stepped closer, protocol momentarily forgotten. Ask me properly, Captain Hale. Marcus's eyes brightened with hope. He held out the pendant again. Lyra of Aravian, would you do me the honor of accepting this promise? Not just of my heart, but of a shared future, whatever complications it might bring? Instead of answering immediately, Lyra removed her royal pendant and placed it in his other hand. In our oldest traditions, before ceremony became rigid law, this exchange meant the joining of houses, of lives, of destinies. She took his pendant and placed it around her neck, where it nestled beside her ceremonial one. My answer is yes. Marcus of Earth, let us create a new tradition together. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, neither noticed the small group of council members who had rounded the garden path and now stood witnessing the exchange. Elder Malin quietly ushered them away, a knowing smile on his ancient face. Above the palace, visible even in daylight, the star that had appeared during the temple's destruction still shone, dimmer now, but present. In the oldest texts, those rarely consulted even by scholars, it was written that the guiding star would remain as long as Aravian followed the true path of honor. In the garden, surrounded by crystal flowers that bloomed against all odds, two people from different worlds embraced their shared future. One, built not on rigid tradition or cold duty, but on the most honorable foundation of all, truth freely chosen, and love freely given. The alien princess had once prepared to sacrifice herself for honor, but the human wouldn't let her. Together, they had discovered that the greatest honor lay not in sacrifice, but in the courage to live for something greater than oneself. And in that discovery, both their worlds would never be the same.